Greetings, greetings, greetings. You are now tuned into the vault. Trust Christian own, nothing control everything. Just want to thank you for tuning in live, listening to replay. Always appreciate everybody for tuning in live, listening to replay. Shout out to all the listeners that listen to the vault throughout the years. Appreciate everybody for tuning in live on this episode, the Vault 293 Sunday service for trustees. You versus the trust. Appreciate you all for tuning in live, listening to replay. Thank you. So, gonna go ahead and move forward. This is the Vault episode 293, Sunday service for trustees. You versus the trust. Always appreciate everybody for tuning in live, listening to replay. This was a episode that a lot of people throughout their years come to the Vault. We've actually started a series for Sunday service for trustees. A lot of people come to our workshops on Saturday, and so we could do a 2 day. We would be doing a 2 day with the trustees. So we're going to make it a point to have our trustees very equipped, not just for Sunday service, but Saturdays as well. So just going to go ahead and get into this episode. Once again, this is Sunday service for trustees, you versus the trust. A very important episode because for so long, so many people have asked, what's the difference? What is the advantages? What's the disadvantages? So we're going to go ahead and match up you versus the trust. So you're ultimately competing against an entity. You're competing against something that lasts almost forever. A trust is a contract, so something can be set up in perpetuity. We always have to preface our episodes. They're not financial advice or legal advice. We always talk to you all as entrepreneurs, investors, talking to you all about structures and things like that that you can talk to lawyers and accountants about. So that's why we do interview people on our particular podcast. But we also know that when you're in the private sector, you have to get in the private sector with people that are doing it, so you can find the right people to engage with. So the vault is that resource, and so we're going to go ahead and talk about that today. The resource in which we provide as far as trustee training, but knowing that you are not the trust is very, very critical and something you learn in trustee training, because a lot of times when you're on the public side, you're going to see that a lot of people are going to amalgamate and say you're the trust. Usually that's called a living trust, where people have periods of time where they give assets away and then they end up getting assets back. Somewhere they're taxable, somewhere in the future. Whereas our trustees like to deal with never having to deal with that ever again. In that capacity, giving away assets and never having to deal with it ever again, giving it away irrevocably. And these are things that a lot of trustees and people that inquire at the vault ask about. They ask about giving away assets and what's the liability and things of that nature. But there's a difference between giving away an asset and giving away income. And so we always talk to our trustees about those type of thought processes and things of that nature. So definitely appreciate that for letting people know that. So let's continue going into it where the trust is an entity. You as a living flesh being, you're not an entity. A lot of people like to throw out the social. The social is another entity. It's not you. But when we talk about you in this instance, we're talking about you, the way you convey assets, the way that you conduct business. Are you conducting business through EINs? Are you conducting business through social security numbers? We were talking to some investors yesterday, and they were talking about investing abroad. And think about how challenging it is. We actually had a consultation the other day ask about how a domestic person investing internationally, and what are the liabilities, what are the benefits. There's minimal benefits because a lot of people don't like dealing with domestic situations, domestic people, public people. They bring all types of encumbrances, particularly from the states. And so people say, oh, I need to be in a private capacity when I'm operating. Correct, because that is international law. It's international, it's contract, it's private. And this is what our trustees are trained into. So when they're operating abroad, they understand that they should not be operating nakedly. That entities may have to be in place. Traditionally, they try to stay away from domestic entities. Domestic entities, domestic people, same situation. They involve encumbrances. They involve disclosure. When you're in the private sector, it's non-disclosure. There are things that go on in other jurisdictions that have nothing to do with another jurisdiction because they're separate. They're private. How can that happen if you're domestic? It can't. It has to always go back to the domestic creation. And traditionally, people are doing it from a social perspective. They're doing it from a social security perspective in the States. So how can you operate in privacy abroad when you're operating through the social abroad? People say, well, how do you get around that? Once again, it's business, not personal. That's what the trustees learn at trustee training. They learn how to operate through the correct situations, the correct structures, so they can move forward with their lives in a capacity where they feel like that their rights are not being completely stripped away from them, and they feel like that their rights are actually being upheld. And those rights are usually being upheld when you're in the proper capacity. And the proper capacity is in trusteeship. That's what it is. If people say, oh, well, can I operate with a corp abroad? Ladies and gentlemen, we had this question yesterday in the consultation. You can, just know that there's liabilities. Why? Because the entity was created in the United States. It's operating abroad. There's liabilities in that situation. Now, the entity, we're talking about corporates, state created entities. You all are very familiar with these things. But even the birth certificate was a state created entity. So the birth certificate operating abroad is the same situation. It's a state created entity. So what should be operating abroad? Just like as much as what can be operating domestically. Entities that are private. Contracts. Why? Because we're in a common law era. We're in the era where England ruled almost 2/3 of the world at one point. So they spread common law throughout the world. They spread contract law. Then you do have Muslim jurisdictions. But a lot of these jurisdictions, you do have civil law jurisdictions. You do have jurisdictions that adhere to contracts that are private. So when people say that they're stripping away privacy, they don't know what they're talking about. There are countries in the world, such as even America, the United States, where they respect privacy. They respect contract. And if you are not doing business in that capacity, then you know what you get. You get crumbs. You get the highest tax liability available to you. Why? You're getting taxed because of your ignorance. You're getting taxed because you're doing things personally, not business. And that's in all areas of people's lives. People try to say, oh, I hate the system. I hate the system. The system is set up for wealthy people. Not only to get wealthy, but to stay wealthy. That's what the laws are set up for. The laws are not to benefit the you. The laws are to benefit in God we trust. Bottom line. And that trust comes in the form of a contract. That's what they respect. That's what gets precedent. You is almost operating in a childlike manner. Why? Because it's not operating in a family manner. It's operating from an individual capacity. Think about what they call you. They call the you an individual taxpayer. That's what the you is. The trust is a business. Think about the you in the case of Donald Trump's situation. He was the you. Did he pay any taxes? No. Because he wasn't operating through the you. He was operating in the Trump Foundation. The Trump Trust. This is how business is done with all elites. This is Sunday Service for Trustees. You versus the trust. Appreciate you all for tuning in live, listening to replay. Feel free to type into the chat where you're listening live, where you're listening in from the replay. Appreciate California for tuning in live, listening to replay. Shout out to California for tuning in live, listening to replay. Trust can do things we will never be able to do as domestic, quote-unquote, citizens or domestic people or public people. They can operate internationally with minimal knowing. Why? Because you don't always have to be the trustee in other jurisdictions. There are entities that are big, that are massive, that operate in multiple jurisdictions at the same time. This is how you create a term called leverage. Appreciate Delaware for tuning in live, listening to replay. Shout out to Delaware. You you're going to pass away. We used to always start our presentations out with our trustees at the workshops and say, trust, trust can do two things that we'll never have to deal with, which is dealing with a tax liability and never dying. That's what they do. They get rid of those two situations. Those situations. So how does a person get around that? How does an individual get around that? They have to own nothing, control everything. That is the rules to the game. That is, it's business, not personal. It's as simple as that. The Vault, episode 293, Sunday service for trustees, you versus the trust. How can you outperform something that can do everything you can do and do more than you can do? And it doesn't die. People say, oh, I'm working hard. But who are you working hard for? Yourself? What about the ones that have children? Are you working hard for yourself? You? Or are you working for the trust? The family trust? Because the family trust doesn't die. The family trust can pass along not only money, it can pass along intellectual property, information. It can pass along those things. Some people say, well, does the child need to be the beneficiary? We train our trustees to put their children in a position of successor trusteeship. To keep them in a non-taxable position, you have to put them in a position of successor trusteeship. That is what the trustee training is all about at the Vault. It's successor trusteeship. If you would like to get in the trustee training program, enroll in the trustee training program, because we have open enrollment right now. We're having our next workshop here in April. It's Christian@trustchristian.com. Once again, it's Christian@trustchristian.com. So, are you training your successors? That's what it's all about. It's creating a manual for the next generation. How are you going to learn that? Well, most trustees come and enroll in the program to see the unique ways that the Vault has put a system in place to train successor trustees to step into that position when that role is there. When that role is there, it's time for them to take on that role. Whether it's children, whether it is someone outside of the family to come in, even if you're hiring a lawyer, someone to come in and manage the assets from one generation to the next, or particularly assets, and then as well from not just one generation to the next, but multi-generational type thought processes and things of that nature. How can you do that? If you do it in your name, it's taxable. If you do it in your name, you're liable. The trust is business, not personal. It's the family's. It's not yours. Sunday service for trustees, you versus the trust, says it's the family's, not yours. But how many people can bear this burden? How many people can live this way? Not too many. Why? Because it requires diligence, responsibility, and management. And that management is the everyday management. That diligence is doing the duties daily. The responsibility is specifically if you're the first trustee or you're one of the first trustees of that particular family situation, you're the most responsible out of the entire family. You are caretaking for what's considered the overall family's estate, not for your immediate family, the family's estate. For generations. Of course, you're bearing the burden for generations. This is the burden of a trustee. Some trustees adapt. Sunday service for trustees, you versus the trust. The trustees that enroll in the trustee training system understand that the you is for sure little and that the trust is for the family. They understand that entities are for the family because it's business, not personal. Everything that they do is investing for the family. If the trust is investing in the education for the trustee, It's the trust expense, because the trust is developing the trustees. That happens at all levels, all the time. People continue their education. It's called a continuing education credit. Whether it's a trustee, such as a lawyer for managing trust, lawyers could go to continuing education programs. Accountants go to continuing education programs. They are not always first trustees, they're not always on the board of trustees, but in times they can be. So in turn, if you are managing your family wealth from one generation to the next, then there needs to be a trustee education system in place to manage wealth from one generation to the next. Usually the wealth won't fall off if there's a trust in place. What falls off from the second to the third generation is the lack of planning, which means that there wasn't a good record keeping from before. So in turn, the second and third generation didn't see the importance of going back and reading records, developing records, because it's about the family. They develop the system of intergenerational wealth in a system. People say, how simple is it? How simple can it be, Trust Christian? Can it just be that, we got a trust up and running, and at the same time, did you create an educational system inside of that? Or you were just focused on only protecting assets? Because how many people do just come just for protection of assets? How many people do just come for minimizing liabilities in many different areas? How many people come for those reasons? But how many people come say, I need an educational system that I can utilize to facilitate intergenerational wealth building? How many people can do that? And how many people are willing to submit and lower their ego and get into an educational perspective? Not, oh, I just needed to help me in my current situation. Of course it's going to help you in your current situation. It's trusteeship. Why? Because now you're separating the business from the personal. That's the first thing you do in trustee training, is you got to separate the business from the personal. You got to separate your business wealth from your family wealth. Those are two different things. Don't they have husbands and wives going to two different jobs? That's business. What happens when they come together and they're not on their job? That's family. That's a clear separation in the training. The training is to develop you and the family at hand to understand that it is about the family. It is not about the personal situation. And what we see at times is obviously when you see a class of people that are not overly family oriented, particularly in the States, where they don't have family units are not as strong as they used to be. You can see that there is a need for these type of systems, but there is a resistance to these type of systems because people are having to drag their family members to wealth building. They're having to drag their family to insurance policies. They have to drag their family members to these things. They have to drag their family to having a private family retreat. They have to drag their family to doing a family board meeting. They have to drag them. Who are we dragging here? Are you dragging your mom? Are you dragging your dad? Are you dragging your brothers and sisters? We've actually had trustees go through where literally a group of brothers and a brother and sisters went through the training program. Most of them were under 30. They were all under 30. It was 4 of them. And the brother was the oldest. The sisters were younger. They needed to learn for themselves. That's how powerful the training program is, when you have families, young individuals that are working together as a unit, the brothers and sisters. They didn't need to force their family to come together. They were together. Are you facing those situations? Are you facing that situation where it's you versus the trust, which is you versus the family? You versus the family. The family has to be able to come together, sit down, and make solid decisions and actually do what's called planning. But how many people don't want to plan their financial futures. Planning your financial future looks like sitting down with someone at the vault, trust Christian in the vault, getting a consultation or making it a point to seek out alternative forms of education, someone seeking out finding better lawyers, finding out better accounts, and interviewing people that would consider themselves to be private, things of that nature, because you're seeking out to maintain your privacy. See, when you're looking to maintain your privacy, not just get your private, you want to go private. When you are in the private, you maintain your privacy. The way that you maintain your privacy is by getting out and meeting other people in those jurisdictions. You going private? Did you inquire with the vault? Did you inquire with anyone that's in the private? Some people may say yes. Many may say no. You versus the private. Remember, you're in the public. Most people have been given a public education, so they're in the public. They've been taught their whole life. All you got to do is study, go to a good school, get a good education, work hard on a job, and then you'll be good at 65. That's the public retirement program. It's called Social Security. If you are not on the Social Security plan, you versus the trust. You gave up Social Security. The family security is more important. The family security will always be more important. Family housing, family emergency funds, family having emergency lines to connect with each other, family having multiple options. The family having a system of inner banking, interfamily banking. Someone laughed the other day when we told them that, of course, we have a private family bank. That's what you do in the private. You have private family banks because you don't deal with the public side in public banking in the private sector. The public stays in the public, the private sector stays in the private. So you have to have a private family bank in a private. But did you go to those other private people and ask them, well, should I be practicing private family banking in the private? And what was their response? Because the vault says that's what we practice in the vault. It's the second step in a 4-step process is practicing family banking. Why? Because we understand the importance of lending, credit, leverage, and compound interest. These are things that we train our trustees to train their successor trustees through creating their own internal family manual. We got a question in the chat. Appreciate everybody for tuning in live, listening to replay. Feel free to shout out where you're listening live or tuning in replay from. As well, type into the chat any questions that you have. Is there a network of trustees willing to work with the high level neophyte? Trustee training is one of those programs. At the end of the day, you're going to be Googling these environments, private trustee and training environments. It's not too many of them, but you can Google those things. And you can see that the American Bankers Association has meetings for private wealth managers. When you are a trustee, you're a private wealth manager, or you're a wealth manager. Usually when you're in trust, you're managing an asset which deals with some form of wealth. So you're a wealth manager. That's why it's assets under management next to your name. How much are you managing? How much does the trust have of ownership that you're managing as a manager? AUM. How many assets are people managing in a personal capacity instead of a business capacity? Did you know that the tax code was set up for business entrepreneurs? Did you know that the world is set up for entrepreneurs? Did you know it's set up for people in the correct position? How many more days are you going to let go by that you may not be in the correct position? How many days can I keep letting go by, Trust Christian, in the vault before I have to deal with, a personal liability at any moment? You're already liable because it's you. So how do you deal with it from a trust capacity? You don't own anything. You just control things. You control company cars. You control the company itself. That's what the managers of the company do. They let go of the veil of ownership and they took on the cloak and responsibility of trusteeship. So do you want to continue to do business in a capacity where there is slight limitations by you doing business domestically and abroad? So many people want to know how to invest internationally. Well, how can you invest internationally when you're not in the proper vehicle? There's international vehicles. Just like they need airplanes to get through the air, they have international vehicles in business. That's a contract in contract jurisdictions. Because all of those jurisdictions deal with contracts. Now, there are different jurisdictions that deal with different variations in the contracts, the way that they have to be constructed and things of that nature. The world operates off that capacity. Trustees are definitely looking to have some level of international diversity in their portfolio. And by them looking to have some international diversity in their portfolio, that's why they're enrolling in trustee training. That's why they're that's why they went through the trustee training, because they needed to make themselves abreast of how to go abroad and how to operate abroad properly, instead of doing it in a public capacity called a U.S. or a citizen. They want to know how to do that. They want to make sure that they can get past the lobby. They don't want to always be pigeonholed into going into Switzerland or Liechtenstein or Luxembourg or Andorra. Trustees don't want to always be pigeonholed into saying that, oh, they have to go get another residence or some type of opening up business entities in what's considered to be tax havens, such as a Bermuda, such as a Bahamas, in the Caribbean islands. They don't want to be pigeonholed in that perspective. So trustees take the training program to learn that you don't have to operate in that capacity. You don't have to operate where you're bringing unnecessary attention. You're not going to be operating from an adverse position to the world. So they learn trusteeship, how to operate in those positions where when they're abroad, that's the exact capacity that they're operating in. When you see the Clinton Foundation operating in another jurisdiction, they're a private family foundation. They're operating in the proper capacity. Appreciate Ron N for tuning in live, listening to replay. Shout out to Ron N. Definitely wanted to do that episode, and you're welcome for that episode. Definitely wanted to do that episode. It was a very important episode. Feel free, everybody can go back and listen to 291, episode 291, preparing taxes with preparing taxes for a trust. We did an interview with a IRS enrolled agent. So feel free to go back to that episode. That's episode 291. But nevertheless, Sunday service for trustees, you versus the trust. It's you versus the trust. Is it yours? Did your lawyer set you up where you were the trustee, or you were the grantor, or you were the beneficiary? Trustees at the vault know it's only one superior position: trusteeship. That's why they're going through trustee training. There's only one superior position. They know that they need to get in the same position that every other elite is in. And once they're in that position, they start learning how to train their successor trustees immediately. Because if anything happens to them at that point, they'll have some form of record that could get them started. It could be something as simple as reach out to Trust Christian or the Vault if you have an issue, or reach out to this organization if you have an issue. Reach out to this lawyer that I contacted early right away. Reach out to this accountant that, hey, if you need in any situation, they're high level, they know exactly what I was doing when I was putting it together. That's what you learn when you step in trustee training the first day. How much liability are you willing to carry? And how much is the trust willing to carry? Specifically the private one. We're not talking about the public trust, we're talking about the private ones. The contracts, the trust. The private contracts. The ones that are more superior to the public contracts. Appreciate everybody for tuning in live, listening to replay. If you have any questions, feel free to type them into the chat. But this is always what we want to do on Sundays. Do a Sunday service for trustees, you versus the trust. This was an episode that we get quite a bit because people tend to think that they are the trust, and really it's actually an opposition. If you're a trustee, it's definitely an adverse partyship situation. And if you are doing everything in your name, because you have to own everything, then you can see the disadvantage where public people incur liabilities that trust don't. Appreciate you all for tuning in live, listening to replay. Feel free to reach out Christian at trustchristian.com for trustee training. We got our next workshop coming up in April. Look forward to hearing from you all at the Vault. Peace.